And then let's talk about different, senses and how that can be used in communication. So NLP helps us in understanding how a person, what a person's primary way of understanding is. I'm sure you've come across, some colleagues, some stakeholders, some maybe your manager, maybe a client, and you might have seen that they prefer a certain way of communication. Um, we all know people who just love to whiteboard. We also know a lot of people who cannot present anything without a PowerPoint presentation. We also know a lot of people who send very long emails and they say my preferred way of communication is email. Send me detailed email and then I'll respond to you. So we need to understand what is the primary way a person communicates, and you need to build rapport to communicate best in the way that the other person understands and is able to communicate. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. So the primary three areas, which is called the WAC model, and we're going to learn about that in this slide. So the WAC, the V of the WAC is visual. These are people who love to see, drawings. They love to see things whiteboarded, and you can understand this particular person's way of understanding and preferred way of learning is by some of the words that they may use. Right? These are stakeholders or people who use words like, "Yeah, I can picture that. That's a clear-cut solution to this. Okay, let's take a peek at that." Oh, these are just some of the words they might use to help you understand what kind of uh, primary way of communication they prefer. And then there are people who prefer the auditory part, and and this is the reason that there are so many audiobooks which are more popular these days. A lot of people just prefer to hear things, and they understand better when somebody actually vocalizes words instead of it being in a textual format or in a drawing format. And the people who prefer the auditory way of communication, when they speak, they use words like, "Okay, let's play it by ear. That sounds good to me." So these are some of the cues that you might get when people, have the preferred way of learning is auditory. And then there are people who are kinesthetic. These are people who actually feel, they are in that whole moment. They are getting they are in there. They want to experience the whole thing. They are very engaged. And these are people who could, use words like, "Yeah, that idea hit home. I totally got it. Oh, let's get a grip on that situation." So they are coming from the inside, and they're really into that. The whole learning happens when they're engulfed in that information, and they're actually internalizing that all the information in a certain way. So by listening to the words that people use, you can get an insight to their communication style, and you can adjust the way you communicate so that you can build a good rapport with them, so that you are communicating with them in a manner that they understand best. So just a little more on this, because this is very important, the visual, auditory, and kinesthetic ways of learning. Visual is basically what is seen. These are people who love printed material. I'm sure people who, before coming to a meeting, they would bring printouts of emails with them or binders, and they're paying a lot of attention to what the facial expressions are, how a person is sitting, how they're communicating through their body. So that's the visual. And these are people who focus mainly on the spoken words, right? They're really paying attention to what is being said and what is being heard. And then these are people who actually see things in motion. What do you feel? So this is important to understand, what do you see, what do you hear, and what do you feel inside? So it's important to understand that. Neurobiologist Dr. Lu Chen, she did a lot of studies at Stanford, and the amount of information that the brain processes is tremendous. And this particular image or graphic shows some of those little buckets of how information processing happens through the brain. And it is extremely, extremely complex, the way the brain processes information. And till date, they still don't have a clear-cut understanding of how exactly does the brain do that. There is so much more for us to learn. With that, we're going to jump into some more practical points which are going to help us to improve our communication in Agile teams. So I wanted to give a little bit of background so that we can understand these concepts and how we can use that in a practical sense. So I know it was a little bit dry subject. I tried to make it as lively as possible, but it is a lot of information as well.